Emergency Prepcast. Ice is gonna do a thing, not that ice, and we gotta talk about it. Emergency Prepcast. Everybody thinks I sing the theme song, and even though that was very much a put on like 90s hair rocker voice, I probably could approximate our actual theme song.
Yeah.
But
Emergency Prepcast.
See,
yeah, it's not me either.
It's not Phil either. People are not going to believe us. We're not beating the allegations. Maybe it's that we fed both of our voices into an AI, which is problematic in and of itself, and had the AI merge our voices into one. What is important, Phil, is
still whammo.
Did you get all the water and toilet paper at HEB?
So we actually went to HEB last night, which seems like maybe that would have been a bad idea. We had already kind of stocked up on some things earlier in the week, made sure that I had propane in case the power goes out, which my daughter was reading.
You got to make sure that you got propane, Phil. If you don't have propane, you don't have a fire that can light whenever you want it.
We remember 2021 when we lost power to our house for 2.5 days. So we're not gonna repeat that. We did have our gas stove was working during that time, but yeah, I just want to be ready for any contingencies. But HEB, it was weird. All the fresh tortillas were out. Most of the cheese was out. There were some really random things that were missing as opposed to things that were still there. But we are good. We are ready. We made chilaquiles this morning. We are set for whatever winter weather is going to deliver us. What about you?
I'm kind of a heavy pantry stalker as it stands, where I've always got a lot of shelf-stable stuff. We're going to turn into America's Verde test kitchen in a minute. But there is a place in everyone's kitchen that I think is tremendously underutilized, and it's the freezer. There are loads of fresh veg that I'll get or that people get canned that frozen is arguably fresher in a lot of cases, not as sodium packed, low sodium, no sodium kind of things. But yeah, the frozen peas, they're frozen at the height of what you want those to taste like. Frozen peas, good for a black eye, good for eating. But yeah, I did a little bit of here and there, little necessities. I always try to make sure to have a backup of things that I go through pretty heavily, half and half. We drink a lot of coffee in this house, and it's always good to have some half and half. Yeah, if that's your thing.
We did go to Total Wine, by the way. So
that's good.
Speaking of essentials,
I got some heavy whipping cream for this recipe called Marry Me Chicken. That I needed heavy whipping cream and sun-dried tomatoes, both of which I was out of. So I got 2 little things of that. The prepping wasn't really that big of a deal. This morning, though, I had to, delaying our recording, I had to run to the post office and get a couple of things shipped out super fast. And on the way back, realized, I've got the tire light on. I got to take care of that. So I just went over to Discount Tires, and it turns out the tires on the vehicle, rather old, falling apart, in danger of blowing out in such extreme conditions. So I had an unexpected tire bill. And on the way home, went, it's a good time to go ahead and fill up on gas. So I went to one of my favorite grocery stores, and that's 7-Eleven. Okay. And the reason it's become one of my favorite grocery stores is that since the upper management changed to the same people who have run the Japanese side of 7-Eleven, which is highly reputed for its gourmand level convenience food takes. One of the things that has come over from that relationship is a particularly good egg salad sandwich on milk bread with Kewpie mayo. Even if you don't like egg salad, it's great. It's like egg custard, but cold. It's delicious. Texture of the bread's fantastic. It's $5. Can't beat it. And I had not eaten breakfast yet. So I grabbed one of those, grabbed a couple of my favorite juice boxes of wine, as I call those little handheld juice boxes that contain a lot more alcohol than you want to expect from something that is generally the size of what you have apple juice in. So I feel like I'm pretty well ready to set in and catch up on 3 weeks of soccer matches that I missed and that I've managed to remain unspoiled on in different parts of the world.
So you're ready for sleet-pocalypse?
Yeah.
Thanks to the store the French call Setons.
Emergency podcast. Better did a thing, so we gotta talk about it. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency. Emergency podcast. Shut up, oh yeah, shut up, oh yeah, shut up. Emergency podcast. It's an emergency.
Hey, a hearty hello to you all, and welcome to Emergency Podcast, the Austin FC podcast, where we talk about all the Austin FC emergencies, the emergencies with the winter weather that is coming, the emergencies with a not really a surprise signing on Friday, but certainly the timing of that was a little unexpected after the first preseason game. But Facundo Torres is Verde officially. Moisés, how are you doing? And we've covered the winter weather prep. So how did you deal with all the news yesterday? The first preseason game, and then, of course, maybe arguably with the best player that Austin FC's ever had. It remains to be seen, but
Yeah.
could be a candidate there.
Yeah, it feels to me like things are picking up steam, headed toward the season opener, heading toward traveling away preseason in Coachella. To me, the relative ire that some of our colleagues had for the fact that the club had not officially announced Facundo Torres in advance of Thursday media briefing, my understanding is that the media briefing was expected to be Friday instead of Thursday, but when the preseason friendly against San Antonio FC got moved up from Saturday to Friday, the media availability likewise got shifted up a day. So I think the original intention was to either have the official news out or drop the official news right on the other side of a media availability, which would therefore further infuriate our colleagues who were angry that we had no real Facundo Torres questions that we could talk about at the media briefing. But this is a player that Nico has not worked with yet, but has definitely talked to. And so what would Nico have been able to tell us about him? It might have eaten up most of the time, which instead, I feel like we got some pretty good stuff, which we'll get into in a bit. But to lead off with getting into Facundo land, this is a former MLS player who knows the league, who knows the atmosphere at Q2, that has less adjusting to make, whether it's from his previous experience or particularly the club that he played at and the experience that he had there. Club World Cup matches that Palmeiras played in are available on FIFA Plus free of charge, allegedly. So if you want to go back and watch some of those Palmeiras matches that Facundo was in here very recently, go for it. I forget which streamer has Brazil's Serie A rights now. It used to be Paramount Plus, but I think they let it go. He's going to be a solid difference maker. He plays into a lot of the stuff that you and I have talked about a bit, mostly offline, about how it looks like positionally flexible players like Guilherme Biru, like Owen Wolf, like John Gallagher. That is one of what are those big priorities from the sporting side of things. And the more of those kinds of players that are coming in, which I definitely say Facundo falls into that same category, as I would argue Jaden Nelson does, as I would argue Rosales does, as I would argue John Bell does too. Like these four guys as a group, known for a particular placement on the field, but they are also known for being very flexible, very solid team players in the total sense of total football.
We learned a little bit more about that. I was doing a little bit of a deep dive. You sent me down a brief rabbit hole here. You had talked about Nico Estevez not having coached Facundo Torres yet. And I was going to say maybe he has coached against him. He actually has not, although Torres did score a goal in the match between Orlando and Dallas late in the 2024 season, which pretty much knocked Dallas out of playoff contention. Our friend Drew Apperly over at Big D Soccer described that goal thusly. Orlando added a third goal 4 minutes after that as Facundo Torres found his 13th goal of the season after some miscommunication by the Dallas defense. Enrique collected the ball and then played Torres in behind Areola. That would be Paul Areola as the last Dallas defender. Areola tried to make a tackle in the penalty box and Torres, but his fast shot beat Martin Pais. That would be the Dallas goalkeeper at the near post, and that pretty much knocked Dallas out of playoff contention for that season. So of course that was the season where Nico Estevez was dismissed about halfway through, so certainly had probably done some preliminary prep work for Orlando at points getting ready for the whole season, but of course you take those one game at a time. He was long gone by the time that game rolled around. Apropos of nothing really, but just wanted to get some historical perspective in there on that. So we did talk a lot about that positional flexibility, and I do want to get into that a little bit more in a second here, just because we got a sense of also what Austin FC was doing in the friendly, some things that were mystifying to me. But what do you think then Torres then ostensibly as your starting right winger on opening day opposite Jaden Nelson? So you have totally remade both wingers, presumably Mirto Zuni, provided that he's healthy and he has He is trying to recover from something right now, is our understanding, but should be okay by Coachella. Would be the starting day center forward. Although when Brandon Vasquez comes back into play again, that's a question of you have 3 players playing presumably as wingers, but only real 2 wing spots on the field. So I'm just kind of curious as to what actually happens here. Does the team employ kind of like a 4-2-2-2 formation to try to get Azuni, Vasquez, Torres, and Nelson on the field at the same time? Does Nelson take more of a kind of a wing back role? What does Joseph Rosales do? Because apparently he's going to play a lot more midfield. It's confusing. It's exciting. It's interesting. There is, that kind of total football aspect of it. As I know you've talked about before, really, really wanting Austin FC to embrace that. But just curious as to what this all means, like how he fits in. Obviously, he's a goal-scoring threat. I do think that he will be able to assist despite the reviews on his quote-unquote poor XA, his expected assist numbers that certain national pundits have been crowing about over the last few days leading up to the Torres signing. Yeah, just thoughts on what this all means, what we're looking at initially as he integrates into the team and immediately becomes this goal-scoring, goal-contributing threat.
In terms of players that have been brought in, you don't bring in a Jaden Nelson and certainly a Facundo Torres and not expect to start them. Obvious first choices in those positions, whether they take on in the formation more of a traditional winger role or a wing back role. I joked that we're headed toward the Pluckers formation of all wings. Right. It's just a matter of where they're deployed, which is one way to look at this. Is you want guys who are good at ball distribution, who are good at making big sweeping runs back and forth, who are good at just getting into dangerous places that they're expected to be and then surprising the opponent with being in dangerous places they don't expect them to be. These are both guys in Jaden and Facundo with real serious motors on them. Like, those guys can really move, and having that on both sides of the field consistently, the way that Austin struggled to, where you could always expect that Buka was going to take off like a bat out of hell, but not necessarily always who they lined up on the far side, on the opposite side of the field. I think a lot of this goes to stuff that Rodo has said to us, that Nico has said to us about how formations are not a thing that they take seriously, which on its face is, what do you mean you don't take formation seriously? You mean you don't take tactics seriously? Why aren't you taking your job seriously, man? And it's easy from the armchair to take a comment like that as, oh, fans don't know anything. But let's run with it for a minute with the idea of maybe in the formationless form of executing a more Pep Guardiola traditional version of dynamic total football, the formation doesn't matter as much. And we'll talk about this a bit in a running theory that I've got that I'm going to expand on in the newsletter soon. But it feels to me like there is before Brandon gets back, and there's after Brandon gets back, depending on what kind of shape he looks to be in, how hard he's capable of doing, because you don't bring somebody back off of an ACL injury and then immediately burn the rubber off his tires. It could be that we are looking at a formation that is durable regardless of who is available, where Vasquez is very intentionally kept on the bench for a solid amount of time so that there is not that risk of re-injury. Where, what do you mean you bench your top DP guy? What do you mean you want to blast the wings off of this plane, flying it right after retrofitting it? That to me is something that I think that this high performance department, this coaching sporting department are really focused on, is making sure that they are not pinning all of their hopes on somebody coming back from that serious of an injury in a way that is going to unduly put pressure on him and unduly put pressure on plans and expectations being that everything is going to work out great, everything's going to be fine. So as much as I would love to see the evolution to a 5-3-2, a 3-5-2 dual striker setup, which it definitely seems is what this sporting department wants, is a couple of guys up top slightly uneven, where it's very much a formation of 8-2, where you're going to have those two guys up top. Those other guys, those other 8 guys, don't worry about it. Maybe they'll be lined up 4-4-2. Maybe they'll be lined up 5-3-2. Just don't worry too much about it. To me, the addition of Facundo and these new guys that are in is very much about using the concept of formation as something against the opponent. As we saw with Josh Wolf getting too cute with, I'm going to line these guys up this way and they're going to pull these sleight of hand tricks. once everybody figured out how that worked in 2022 going into 2023, that whole you've got to be in your spot concept of positional play was totally busted, as we saw for a long time and a lot of games. This setup is so much more about how this one key guy or this one other key guy or three key guys get injured. It does not break their ability to line up a certain way and then change the way they are lining up according to the flow of play, and then quickly on a dime change again, and then change again and change again. To me, that dynamic shift is the most effective attacking form of football to play, where instead of just continuing to throw the same thing at the other side over and over, aka the definition of insanity, you are constantly making changes. You are constantly redeploying and retasking individual guys rather than having them run back the same thing and run back the same thing and run back the same thing, which we saw not get Austin into the final third nearly enough or keep them in the final third nearly enough last year.
Right. And I know with Nico Estevez, there's this idea that formations are fictional, right? They don't really matter. They're a construct. They help the lesser fans, the lesser experienced fans, we should say.
mere mortals, the mere mortals
Right.
from the cheap seats.
To understand what's going on.
Yeah.
But I also just drew up a best 11 right now.
All right.
And see if you agree with this. So a back line of Joseph Salas, Alexander Svatak, Brendan Heinzike, and Mikhail Dessler.
That sounds reasonable.
Okay. And then your two best midfielders are Owen Wolf and Danny Pereira at this point.
Yeah, obviously.
You'd grant that. Okay.
Yeah.
And then obviously you'd have Jaden Nelson and Facundo Torres as your wings.
Yep.
Okay. And then Azuni's still one of the best 11 players on this team, even though there's concerns about how things went last year, and then Brendan Vasquez when he's back and fully healthy. So essentially, if you've got that as your best 11, that's a 4-2-2-2. You don't have a defensive midfielder in there. I don't know if that's a concern, but that is your best 11 right now. And that is a natural formation that works for that. But that puts a lot of responsibility on Pereira in particular. He has to be, and again, I know that the Moon Tower guys have talked a lot about this kind of idea of you want to have a ball winner as a 6, and then a ball progressor, and then a chance creator in your midfield. And essentially that kind of gets Danny in this hybrid ball winner, ball progressor kind of mold. And I don't know quite how he would do with that, even though I know that when he got here very early on, he was being thought of more of a 6. And then that kind of gets Owen into a hybrid 8-10 role where he's a ball progressor and then a chance creator. And just wondering, is there enough there for that to work? Does that seem like a winning formula? That seems, sure, that could repeat a top 6 finish, but is that kind of the secret sauce that will get them into top 2, top 3 elite territory?
I think so, because of the roster depth, the way that the roster depth works now. When you've got a John Gallagher who is not putting all of his effort into necessarily being a locked-in starter because, well, you've got to put him here, you've got to put him here, you've got to put him here because this one guy's out, this one guy's out, this one guy's out. Right. Then you can take better advantage of him. And I'm not making a like-for-like comparison of him to Ethan Finlay, but you remember that run that Ethan Finlay had as this inhumanly good super sub that he was really, really, really solid. To me, that's a similar kind of behind this ideal 11, having people who are not just guys who can hold things up and make sure that the bus is parked nice and clean, but guys like Gallagher who are really a fundamental threat. And like, you want him raring to go and ready to get out of the starting blocks. That to me is what's most exciting, because I'm thinking about the guys that are on the bench that I am really high on. John Bell's one of them. If you are able to put John Bell out there without having to put a full 90 of every game on him, he is a really solid thing to deploy when you see a particular weakness and you've got a guy whose legs are a little tired and you need to bring him in. Alternately, when it comes to managing match load, which is going to happen sooner than we all think, as with every MLS season, you've got guys like John and John, a tale of two Johns here, that are really solid starters when you've got a guy who takes up a minor knock, who maybe you don't want to risk starting and risk there being an injury that's developed early in the season because you're focused on just trying to get your absolute best guys out there and start making a lead when it comes to the points race early in the first half of a season made up of 2 seasons. That's what I like most about it, not because of exactly what this 11 is able to do, which I think is quite a lot. I think this is a very solid, ideal 11. With Damian Loss as your cup keeper, I'm not worried about cup competitions at all, where we were all a bit worried last year. Even though Austin made it to the Open Cup final, it didn't start out looking like that was going to happen because of the way that the backup keeper was performing. I'm satisfied with what you've put on the field and what is hungry for minutes and ready to come off the bench and improve themselves.
Right. And we still haven't talked even about Biru at this point, who was the starting left back last year. And I assume probably loses that, but we got a little bit of a hint that he might be playing more midfield. We definitely got that about Rosales. That was something that got brought up by Nico in that Thursday press conference. And maybe we should just move to that. Again, just kind of revelations from that. We'll hang on to the first friendly talk from Friday a little bit later on. But yeah, let's go Thursday and Friday, getting into that first match and thinking about how things are shaping up for the season. Again, especially since it looks like now with the sports hernia surgery, Owen Wolff's going to be out the entire preseason. So one of the things I was curious about, and I don't know that we really quite got an answer to this necessarily, but how does chance creation happen on this team, and what opportunities does Esteves have handed to him, the proverbial lemonade out of lemons, now that Wolff is out for the preseason? You have to try other people in that kind of chance creator role.
Mentioning Bidu, he said the words left center back, in addition to saying that he may be playing more of a midfield role. I don't know that this is actually the term for it. Something that in the vein of a wing back is something of a mid back, in where he wants to be able to push forward, but when you've got your left back constantly pushing forward into the attack, you're leaving your left side defenseless. So having Rosales focusing on shoring that up while letting Bidu be at left center back, I think that is a pattern of the dynamic that we can expect to see in other places, where Owen being in the best 11, what happens when they can't start Owen in the season opener? Who fits directly into the rhythm of what they need alongside Danny for that first game?
Right. So are you thinking then as an elbow back, kind of in a back five, where you have Rosales out as a wing?
Yeah.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So Rosales is a wing back, cheating up. You've got Biru, who's able to flex between left back and then center back, but depending on how that back four, back five shifts with the attack. Yeah. And again, that's something that Austin's kind of done in its duration. I know that they were trying to do that a lot with Kolmanic in 23 when Josh Wolff was trying to counter everybody figuring out what Austin had done at the end of 2022. I know that they were working a lot on that at Coachella and the rest of that preseason, and then it didn't quite manifest. But it could be different here, right? I mean, again, we're thinking maybe this personnel is better. Maybe, again, with Roto assembling more of his pieces to play more of a pep ball style, then we were able to do under Wolff and the players that Claudio Reyna had assembled. Maybe that is a possibility then. Maybe that is something that they're able to execute and pull off. I still wonder about players like Sabovic, players like Taylor, wondering what roles they'll have on the team. Certainly they were out there on practice. They did figure into the split squad game that happened on Friday, but not necessarily sure much about their roles. And I know that they didn't really get talked about too much. Was there anything you were able to glean kind of in between the lines about the quote unquote depth pieces now as they were?
Not really. I mean, the indication that I got was really just underlining more of the same about playing up that positional flexibility, where we have not actually seen Robert Taylor play that much. And if the intention is to play him, if he isn't somewhere else by the time the season starts, as various people have said that they wish, I'm not one of them, I'm just saying. To me, that's something to look for, is how does a full preseason, a full off season change the way that they find they can deploy a player like Robert Taylor. There may be some of those existing pieces where we see them doing new and different things than we have seen and expected. What I do think we got loud and clear, it was further beating the drum that 2025 was very much the foundational layer of what they are evolutionally moving toward and doing.
Right. So establish the defense.
Right. Establish the defense, very much building blocks. And this year, much more of the focus goes on the thing that is busted, which is the attack. The defense is really, it is improved. It is stable enough. And I think there's enough roster depth there. At a certain point, people are like, do we need this many defenders? And now everybody's going, yeah, I think we need this many defenders.
for the best part of the press conference. Does Nico Estevez want this team to score more goals in 2026?
He does. Thank you for the praise. I passed along a question, an insistence, a concern that I've read in various quarters of the fan base. And look, if you look at the stats do acknowledge that Nico has not coached very high-scoring teams prior to now. Any number of different reasons that you could pull out for why that is. I'm not going to bother getting into that because that's its own conversation. But there were specific complaints last year that even though there were improvements, even though Austin got to a cup final, there was just something busted in the final third, and there was just something about their goal scoring, their final third, ball distribution ability, and Nico thinks the fans are geniuses because they think just like him. Just the best way to put it. And it was very much to me, reading between the lines, it was I would like to press triangle to pass too. I would love it if these guys would execute on what I know they're capable of, but for some reason are just not doing in competitive matches where they would. It doesn't matter if they're doing it on the training ground, but it's that these guys are capable of all this stuff. Why was it just not happening on the field? Is there a ritual that they need to go through to get rid of bad juju or something? I don't know. But it was refreshing to get that kind of candor from a coach rather than something like, well, you should ask the players. You talk to the players too, right?
Right, yeah.
Or,
so
the players get paid a lot of money.
Having the heart attack on the sideline waiting for the goals.
Yeah, he's going to have a heart attack on the sidelines. He's wanting so many more goals. In his plane as like it didn't get to him, but in as plain of terms as possible, it was like, I'm with you.
Yeah. Fun Nico is back.
Yeah.
US Open Cup semifinal winning Nico is back.
Yeah. Precisely. But yeah, I think this is something that, in talking to John Bell, in what we're hearing from some of the other new players, that having a conversation with Nico is what determined whether various players were going to go with Austin or go somewhere else. Right. When you've got developing guys on the second team, are they actively trying to get bought by other teams, or are they staying here because they believe that this is the right place to be during this phase of the development as they are proving themselves and finding those minutes? Is it a bigger pop through for them to have CJ Faudré moments, or to be literally relegated to second teams for other clubs that spend very differently when it comes to different positions? Austin, it seems, despite heavy turnover in the academy leadership ranks, there is still a lot of solid belief in the development pipeline that has been built over the last half decade.
So let's try to make some sense of the lineups.
All right.
I'm not exactly sure what to make of who they put out on the field on Friday against San Antonio and what turned out to be a 0-0 draw. But first half, they rolled out with Brad Stuber as your goalkeeper, so that makes sense. Gallagher, Bell, Djordjevic, and Biru as your back line. That makes sense. And then this is where it gets a little mystifying. So it looks like maybe you have Ilya and Joseph Rosales in kind of a double pivot, maybe, is the way that they're listed. And then Patrick Sayali, who, of course, not officially Austin FC2 yet, but the super draft pick, that's probably where he's ending up. Irvin Torres, and then Mohamed Badawiya, who was on Austin FC2, and then CJ Faudré. So that's your first half starting lineup. So it looks like a 4-2-3-1, which is not a look that they did a lot last year, but certainly something that historically they've done. And then you got Dobrahevich, I believe we're going to call him. He's that other super draft pick. He got in for Kaeli after a half hour. And then second half lineup, we had Loss as goalkeeper, and then we had Kolmanic, BHI, Riley Thomas. So we had three backline players, two of them fullbacks, Heinz Eich only center back there, and then Cabarro, who is an Austin FC2 player from Ivory Coast, Savovich, Dubrsarski, and then Robert Taylor, Jaden Nelson, and Jorge Alistui, and then Vlad John Chuchu, of course, the Austin FC2 forward, rounding out that second half lineup. So this is a little bit puzzling to me because I'm just unclear formationally, like how they set up. Of course, we were not able to see this closed door scrimmage. Nobody was allowed in. Did not hear about anybody going to Verde Hill. No pictures, nothing like that. No crumbs. So just kind of curious about what you thought of the lineups and what you thought was maybe happening there.
I was kind of surprised to see that many second team guys getting rolled out. Alastaway, I can get. They're the guys that have first team contracts, Irvin, Micah, those guys. But it felt to me like, well, they're a little bit thin in general because Mirto's out, Owen is out, Danny is out with the flu. I think a preseason friendly against a USL side is a great opportunity to see which second team guys have since last year picked up ground, who might be looking to pull the CJ Fodre, to be guys that are showing up big in some respect or another, that want an opportunity to prove themselves. I would feel like they would prefer to do that against San Antonio, against Louisville City, than they would against New York City FC, where NYCFC, I think they hold minutes more specifically for the guys that are definitely going to be playing these starting or backup minutes for the first team, where it's kind of like, here are a couple of preseason games to work out which guys might be your preferred picks when it comes to those temporary call-ups, and then shift gears to, okay, you got 2 shots. Now this is who we're going to actually roll out, admittedly knowing that they're, short in a couple of positions. But they've got to keep those guys that are getting the bigger salaries on their toes and keep them earning their spots. If you are so much better than this second team player, you're so much better than Jacobaro, show us that you're better than Jacobaro.
Yeah. And this is the thing, like we talked about just now here, there's some players that are out with injury or illness. And when you're doing split squad, you need to obviously have 22 people that you can roll out on the field. And then there were a few extra players that got out as well. And just based on what we heard about from Nico with the Izuni injury, it sounds like they're probably holding him out until the Coachella matches, but I feel like based on the timing and what they're saying, they would really want him to get some minutes in that February 1st game against NYCFC. First of all, just to get him some reps and get him against MLS talent, because again, those first 2 games, of course, are against USLC teams, and then also the fans need to see good stuff from him at this point, I think, too, because obviously the last moments we had from Izuni in 2025 were a little shaky. So obviously trying to get his confidence back, because he is going to be leaned on. And you mentioned CJ Fodry, too. He's going to have a lot of opportunities, I think, especially early in the season, to get some reps, to get minutes in there and things like that. But yeah, in terms of Alistue, though, again, we've talked about this before. I know that your kind of working theory, and hopefully we see this bear out, is that he is going to have more and more of a role on the first team, that he is good enough to do that. But some of these other guys, I'm just kind of curious, because these are names that we haven't really heard. These are players that seem like they're kind of more maybe standbys on Austin FC too, but these are players that might not necessarily get sniffs at first team contracts. So I guess this is just round out the rosters, or is there potential in these players here?
I'll put it there's potential in these guys, including Chuy Moreno, who's literally an academy player.
Oh, right.
Like,
about him,
Chuy Moreno had his professional debut for the second team last year because they literally didn't have anybody and had to fill somebody in, and Chuy was in there, and Chuy did a great job in his first professional match. That he's getting any of those preseason minutes is, all right, kid, you showed some promise last year, show us what you can really do. Maybe he's got a breakout season for the second team in him. First team minutes, the first team should not be so desperate to need to put an academy player on the field for first team minutes, unless he really just blows past Irvin Torres even. But these names of second team guys, these are the guys that were really, really showing out and performing best last year. Jacobaro, Mo Badawiya, Vlad Dinchutsu, they were picking up those minutes and earning them. They were earning the starts rather than coming in as subs. And I think it speaks to the promising of a pathway for being able to bring in players that, in the case of Alastue, would require an international slot, even if called up on short-term agreement, either time to get them green carded or just to prove themselves, to prove that they are worth either that highly prized international slot, which maybe those are increased in the next MLSPA negotiation. Maybe the things are being loosened a bit when it comes to those MLS roster rules. Maybe they're not. Who knows? But yeah, this is an opportunity for these young up-and-coming guys to prove themselves worth the special roster designations that make actually rostering them on the first team difficult, while also developing, while biding the time necessary to make it so that they aren't as big of a hit when it comes to those special designations.
And Badawiya, he's an academy player that came up, right?
Yes. Yeah.
And then Barrow. Okay.
Barrow was a straight up acquisition from my memory, right?
From Mallorca, I believe.
Yeah, that was it.
B team, yeah.
A lot of that kind of prizing of people who are thoroughly well known in the Spanish system, and a lot of the staff is Spanish or from that world professionally.
Mm-hmm. Right. So that makes sense. Okay. All right. Well, good. Yeah. And again, of course, did not get to see that, but a week from tomorrow, we get to see the team at Q2. So that's exciting. I get to see them against NYCFC. Hopefully people are a little bit more healed up at that point right now. Right. So, would love to see Azuni actually get a run out and see what he's capable of. Danny sounds like he'll be back by that point. And then presumably Torres again, that's a week. I don't know. Wondering if he'll see minutes.
Be fascinating.
I feel like he will.
It'd be fascinating. Like if he's here and fit and healthy, I think there is a very good, I mean, they want to get him here as fast as they can. I think they want people to see him. They want him in public view. What would be really crazy is if he plays against Louisville City on Wednesday. I think that's too early, but I think Mirto could be good for Wednesday in advance of next Sunday, making it so that he's getting an opportunity to get some actual play minutes before his first play minutes are in front of an audience. I think there's some value to that, and presumably that's what they're wanting, is for him to be back as soon as he's able to. I think it'll be interesting to see what lineups roll out for Wednesday, is where I'm at.
I suspect it's going to be a lot like we saw on Saturday.
Yeah, I think that's realistic.
With Azuni, Nico kind of pumped the brakes a little bit on even him appearing in that NYCFC game. He seemed to hint kind of more towards Coachella.
Good point.
And then speaking of those timetables, Owen, I mean, we did something recently about sports hernias and what they are and the recovery time for Owen. I mean, that idea that he's going to be in that opening match, I still think is maybe a little bit optimistic. They know more about it than we do, but the kind of common sports hernia timetables indicates that maybe he's coming off the bench in that one, if lucky, and maybe doesn't get a start for the first few weeks, but maybe he'll recover quickly from that. But it seems like the timetables on that are a little quick for opening day. So big question mark there. I mean, certainly would be, I think, in the team's best interest if Owen was healthy to play that match. But again, it's Minnesota. They're in a little bit of tumult right now.
Yeah.
Who knows what they're going to roll out? So they have gotten players in. They're just not necessarily the players that were of the same quality that went out. That is remaining to be seen. That will be an interesting match for sure.
Let's see how fast Josh Wolf can speed run shoring up that squad for his new boss.
That's right. Josh Wolf, Minnesota United assistant coach. We'll see if we can get an interview between now and then.
Well, let me float another thing, Phil.
Okay, sure.
Just touching back on a favorite topic of yours.
Yeah.
I think there's a what if here.
Okay.
And it's, what if Uzuni gets moved? Mm-hmm. What if he's not really hurt?
Okay.
Okay. Or not really hurt anymore. I'm not saying that's likely. I'm not saying I have sources to back it up. I'm not saying that I want it, but until he's playing in preseason friendlies, there is going to be that voice in the back of my head of, was the rumored move to Fiorentina something that didn't pan out, but there is something else that they're working on. And instead of it being the pull back from the 2-4 designated player U22, that in fact we do end up with the 2-4 before the season starts. Okay. Maybe. Yeah. Maybe. I don't know.
Maybe. We haven't really, I think Nico's been pretty vague about what that injury is exactly. And yeah. So that is a possibility. I was kind of coming around to the idea that he was going to be here at least till the summer. And basically that would allow, and again, we talked about this and we'll get into this in a second here, this kind of idea. And I know that you broached this with Nico on Thursday, this kind of idea of 2 seasons in one, right? So maybe that first half of the season is the Azuni half of the season. You're getting Brandon up to full strength to be center forward. And then when the European main window is open in the summer, then that's where you can find a
following
place
him,
Azuni,
following him playing in a World Cup,
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And you get him to hopefully be able to build this confidence up. With Torres coming in, you probably have a main penalty taker now that's not Azuni, and that's probably okay with everybody concerned, right? So that's certainly something that I think would help him along. I mean, he would just have to concentrate on being that focal forward, but theoretically having players that would sync better with him at that point and could feed him more opportunities. And then it's just a matter of him being able to convert and try to ride that through. But maybe since we haven't really seen him and this seems like a vague holding him out. Maybe
I cannot see them.
Maybe there was something to that. I don't know.
Well, I'll say this. I cannot see them taking a loss on him transactionally when they could. More of a loss. I'm saying sell him off to get him off the books, buy him out. I don't think any of that's in the cards, no matter how much different people are making blood sacrifices and wishing for it. I don't think that's realistic. I think it's more realistic on paper to go let him play through a World Cup during this first half of the MLS season and build up that valuation and get buyers interested in him. Instead of it being more of a buyer's market for him, make it more of a seller's market for him, where lo and behold, if he has an incredible World Cup, it's kind of, if you want to look at Uzuni as a loss, which isn't how I'm characterizing it, isn't how I personally feel about it necessarily. If you want to look at him on the books as a loss to take, either you can take this loss now, or you can take literally the exact same loss later, and you've lost absolutely nothing in the interest of seeing if you can build on evaluation. And ideally, the ideal that Roto has said with everything, everybody is always for sale for the right price. If they could sell him for a profit, how many cartwheels would people who hate Uzuni, want Uzuni off the team, want him off the books, how many more cartwheels would people do for that than selling him at a loss? That's where my head's at. I don't think it's likely, but if the other pieces moving in would benefit from moving him now, then I could totally understand why we are getting vagaries about why he's not available. In the same way that, yeah, they're totally waiting on a visa for O'Brien, which is actually accurate thanks to U.S. policy, whether it's an accurate excuse or not. In Svatak's case, that green card's a green card. That's totally understandable. That's the two vague areas of, I wonder what's actually going on despite what people's assumptions are. In Mirto's case, it's, I think people believe on face value that an injury is an injury, but there could be something else to it. With O'Brien, I don't think people believe what we were told on its face that is, and it's a matter of how that resolves itself, if that resolves itself before the opening of the season.
Yeah, O'Brien moving, I think, is much more likely at this point than Uzuni. So, yeah, so you talked about Uzuni, Albania World Cup. That still remains to be seen. They are in the playoff, though. So if you are interested in Uzuni getting into the World Cup and upping his transfer value or repping Austin, depending on how you feel about Uzuni, these are important dates. So they will play a one-game playoff against Poland on March 26th in Warsaw. The winner of that plays the Sweden-Ukraine winner, and the winner of that gets into the World Cup.
It does potentially set up an Uzuni versus Svatak World Cup playoff.
Yeah, it does. And that's interesting.
It's nuts that might work out that way.
It is. So the winner of the European Playoff B bracket place, as we're calling it, if Albania gets into that, or Ukraine, Sweden, and Poland, depending on what happens, they're up against Netherlands, Japan, and Tunisia. So that seems a little rough. I think Netherlands and Japan are your 1, 2, depending on, I don't know who wins that group, but I think your European
Japan
group at
wins
that
it.
point is vying for third place. Yeah, I think so, maybe too.
I think Japan wins it on the criterion of Netherlands is camping in Kansas City, which I don't think is an ideal way to train for the U.S. version of extreme temperatures that those Dutch players are not used to playing.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Kansas City gets pretty balmy.
Yeah, it does. Okay, all right. I'm just trying to trash Kansas City. You found me out, Phil.
Well, that's easy to. I mean, Kansas City being balmy.
You see what they call barbecue? Yeah.
Difference.
Want to do some calendar talk?
Let's do some calendar talk.
So I'm going to get into a bit of this in a piece that I'm going to write up this weekend for the beginning of the week. But I decided, as I do at the beginning of each year, I refresh my planner and I look at the spread of the year and trips I need to take and things that I need to do and that kind of thing. And I looked at especially things that affect the MLS calendar, or rather the MLS calendars, you could say, where everybody knew, okay, yeah, everybody's taking off June for the World Cup, but it's not taking a month off. It's taking 2 months off. MLS effectively shuts down on May 24th, and Austin does not have another match until July 22nd. And there will be like a summer warm back up kind of period, sure. But when it comes to actual competitive matches, there will be 2 full months that the vast majority of MLS players are not going to be playing in a World Cup and not otherwise doing other stuff. Presumably there will be friendlies going on, all that kind of stuff. But looking at that 2-month break, it very much has that apertura clausura kind of thing, even though the order of things is different in Liga MX's terms. Right. But in the cases of those leagues that very much have a Season A, Season B every year, which when you look at the revised MLS calendar that takes effect going 27-28, that's the way that the winter break is going to end up going. So it's going to be a similar length of time off that is just going to be shifted to a different time in the calendar in terms of what we're going to see this summer.
Yeah, because you also have that sprint season 27.
Right, precisely.
So you have like kind of these 3 half seasons in a
exactly.
row. You're seeing 26 as 2 half seasons.
Three half seasons for one whole bag. So the other part of this, I mean, that's one thing. And I think it's something that plays into comments that we've gotten. And that's why I put it to Nico very directly as it really feels like you've got to tactically plan for what are you going to accomplish in Season A? What are you going to accomplish in Season B? Season A is going to either have no Brandon Vasquez involvement, depending on how his injury rehabs, or limited at best Brandon Vasquez involvement as warm-up for Season B. Presumably, let's say hypothetically he is great, because that is one of those things. They cannot make any of the plans, certainly for Season A, revolving around him definitely being available, and they can't even plan for Season B that he is definitely going to be 100% available and ready to rock. When we talked about the positional flexibility a minute ago, that plays into the fact that U.S. Open Cup starts for Austin and various other teams in April. Here, calendar-wise, and we'll have this in an article which will be probably easier to visualize unless you're looking at your calendar literally right this minute. But the round of 32, which is when MLS clubs join U.S. Open Cup, is April 14th and 15th. 2 weeks later, round of 16, April 28th and 29th. The quarterfinals are May 19th and 20th, literal days before the soccer world shuts down for the World Cup.
Right.
So the semifinalists for the U.S. Open Cup will play their match September 15th and 16th, 4 months later, with potentially completely different squads after an international break and World Cup.
And just looking at it here, so let's say Austin gets in the quarterfinals, you said the 19th or 20th?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so they're going to have a match. They're having weekly matches. They've got a match on the 22nd of April, and then April 25th, May 3rd. And then they would theoretically, if they're in the quarterfinals, go May 3rd, May 10th, May 13th, May 16th, May 19th or 20th, and then May 23rd. So you've got essentially 6 games in a 3-week span, and then you're off for 2 months.
Yeah. Now,
which
the
is
other aspect
quite
of this,
the schedule
Phil,
congestion.
Well, Phil, we haven't even mentioned your, my, and everyone's favorite thing, Leagues Cup.
Leagues Cup.
Leagues Cup runs August 4th through September 6th. So when it comes to that roster depth and everything, Leagues Cup occurs pretty much right at the beginning of Season B in the way that a few weeks into Season A, Open Cup starts in. On the other side of that break, on the other side of presumably some summer transfer stuff going on for Austin, they're going to have either the same roster we're looking at with minor changes or this roster with some adjustments going into, ideally, one would say, the last 2 stages of the U.S. Open Cup, right on the heels of also competing in Leagues Cup. To me, the biggest thing about what we're seeing with this push for positional flexibility is fair credit to this sporting operation trying to make it so their players do not die with this kind of match load. That's the biggest thing, is they are building for the gauntlet of all gauntlets. Not because they have a ton of guys that are going to be playing in the World Cup for sure or for maybe, but because forgetting the World Cup is even happening, the break that it introduces and the way that it heavily compacts fixture congestion unnaturally in a couple of different places is something that every team in the league is having to deal with. And a lot of them are focusing and preferring things like CONCACAF Champions Cup, focusing on MLS Cup, that kind of thing. It feels like what Austin is battening down the hatches for war on is a war on many fronts.
Yeah, and if you're looking at this with the Season B, I mean, have you looked at like the start of Season B and what that looks like?
Uh-huh.
Let me run this
not
by
fun,
everybody.
right?
So hosting the Sounders on July 22nd, right out of the gate. Then 3 days later, Copa Tejas match at Houston. Then a week later, trip to Colorado. So I guess that's comparatively nice. And then hosting Dallas on the 15th after Leagues Cup. And then going to Seattle 4 days later on the 19th. And then hosting Philadelphia, going to Portland, and then hosting San Jose. And then there's a Vancouver match in a couple of games after that as well.
It's a monster. It is starting the second half of your season like the beginning of playoffs in terms of high-end opponents, which they may be dealing with their own things, but you can't bet on that. You can't bet on everybody else is going to be depleted, so wish, pray, and hope and play some academy guys. But we also might see some academy guys, depending on how bad injuries beset the club by then.
And a Houston team that's also getting better.
Bogusz, I hear. Bogusz? Is that?
Yeah,
is
Bogusz.
Bogusz.
And Hector Herrera's back, too.
Hector Ache? Oh, my. Oh, dear.
Which is going to be weird. So any other thoughts about just what Nico said about that kind of your theory about the 2 seasons, laying some credence to that in terms of how he's thinking about that? And that's not just Vasquez and pre 100% Vasquez and post 100% Vasquez, but just also in terms of there's schedule congestion, but also just how you approach things, the kind of goal setting, things like that.
It's to me, it's not Josh Wolf style, well, we didn't need to win that game kind of hedging, but Nico did give a very direct indication that he sees that first half season as that is when Austin really needs to bank a bunch of points. Really, really, really needs to bring home as many 3-point games as humanly possible. Because as you just rolled through, just looking at the beginning of that second half of the season, that's going to be brutal, and that's going to result in the last chunk of that second half of the season being also brutal. He's recognizing the fact that they are going to have to conserve strain, conserve stamina to not have no gas in the tank left when it's time for playoffs, when it's time for a Leagues Cup final, when it's time for this, when it's time for that. I feel confident in terms of the way they are setting up the board for Austin following through with what Roto has said, which is that he wants this club to be capable of competing in all competitions. That's the kind of thing that somebody coming to this as your next job after winning the treble with Manchester City, that is something that I believe he believes to his core. We'll see how it plays out. And frankly, these specific reinforcements they've brought in, Nelson, Bell, Rosales, Torres, especially Torres, I'm going to go the full opposite of the David Goss on this and say I think that Facundo Torres is the perfect example of how the sporting operation has learned from recent moves that they wish had panned out better, but that are a testament to MLS being a really weird, really more competitive than people give it credit for league than others in the world.
Yeah, so let's get someone in here who's already shown to be successful, and let's lock him up with,
Knows
even if
travel.
You count the short season, a 5+1. Like
5+1
deal.
I mean, some people were calling it a 4.5+1. Okay, fine. But it's literally the longest contract they could have signed him to +1.
Right. Yeah. Keeps him here for the rest
all of his best
20s.
Years. All of his best remaining years.
Yeah,
right?
It's great. Yeah. Oh, one more thing. Yeah, just kind of circling back to something you said earlier. You're talking about this kind of idea of needing to bank points in the first half of the season. That's something we know this team can do.
Oh yeah.
Putting May aside, May was a gauntlet as we know, but that's why they were in the playoffs, because there were 2 points in the season, that kind of first part, and then like right after May where they had that little bounce back and had that run of games where they were doing well. That's why they were in the playoffs, because they were able to bank points at those 2 parts of the season. Yeah. So this is a team that knows how to do that, and theoretically a team that's offensively better. One of the things, going back to this kind of idea, and we're a little bit all over the place today, but that is the preseason.
Welcome to the preseason.
Yeah. So just this idea of, okay, the defense is set and now the offense is going to be better. That's a need, because this is one stat that I'm really going to be looking at, even though Austin made playoffs in 2025 and in a reasonably good position. They've had negative goal differentials the last 3 years, and actually 4 of their 5 years of existence. So that's something that, clearly if they're going to get into that top 4 tier, first things first, they need to work on that. They need to have a positive goal differential. You can bank points in the season, but your overall prognosis, if you are in negative goal differentials heading into the playoffs, is probably not good.
Listeners to the show will know that I definitely do not identify as the stats guy or a stats guy or ASA fan number 1 or something like that. But all joking aside, that negative goal differential, that is definitely a stat that I, an avowed non-stats guy, identify as a key indicator of a particular kind of rot that you really got to clear out, or your foundation is falling out if that's not improving. If you're improving in other places, if your goal differential is staying negative, that is literally what is actively keeping you out of the advantageous top playoff seed spots. It is what is taking you out of selling players with a positive GAM return, that sort of thing, that make it so that you can actually progress your roster forward. Yeah. I don't know if we want to get into the stats stuff from here, but it might be a good opportunity to bridge to some of the sadder, albeit dorky, news of the week. Let me preface this with, as the non-stats guy who likes to make fun of the stat and that stat and XC, right, the expected coach stat, sure, and all that other kind of stuff. I know that not everybody who listens to the show is even as much of a quote-unquote stats guy as I consider myself in some respects. And many other people would not consider me a stats guy in any respect. They would be ashamed of me even getting close to that moniker. When it comes to the stats available for analysis by people who really look at the fine-tuning of this stuff and translate the jargon into something that is somewhat understandable to the non-stat heads who don't speak the jargon, who don't speak the stats. The thing that happened this week is something that I think people who know that world already definitely know about it, but a lot of people don't. And the biggest thing that you mentioned, we were talking about it offline before this, is that it seriously hampers something for women's soccer that has been a big part of expanding that world. Part of the reason that you have a Trinity Rodman signing a 3-year, $1 million a year deal with the Washington Spirit is because stats analysis is out there. That makes it so that the underfunded, exalted in terms of the soccer establishment world of women's soccer is going to hurt more from this than I think people might expect on first glance. So tell us about the bad news of FBref this week.
Yeah. So let's go ahead. Yeah. Let's back up a little bit first and talk about like how these stats actually get made, right? So there's a few different services, but Opta is kind of the giant here, the big one, right? So, and they provide stats to a lot of places like FBref. And we think this is kind of who the culprit is here in this, but essentially what happens to make these stats, you have to have games tracked, right? So you have to have somebody actually physically watching these games saying this person passes this person, such and such. And I think maybe there is some AI enabling of some of this stuff, because some of also what's happening with stat gathering now is that there's more of a trend towards off-ball movement type stuff, right? So it's not just who's passing, who's shooting, but trying to get additional data on the books in order to be able to understand the game better. This is all about trying to figure out, it's in a way, yes, it is reducing soccer and this action on the field to numbers, but it's looking at data to be able to then get trends based on that data, to be able to figure out tendencies, to be able to figure out what certain players are capable of doing. We know that expected goals don't not necessarily translate to goals, but it's something that is useful and helpful.
And so when chuckleheads like me say, oh, the stats are made up, there's just some person out in a high school soccer field in Indiana just going, oh, well, that looks like blank to me, that is putting into tangible, measurable data what people are seeing in terms of momentum. When you hear things like tilt, when you're talking about teams showing advantage, ability to, there's the number of minutes they hold the ball is one thing, but how those minutes are used is where a bunch of these more esoteric sounding stats come from.
Right. So, so there's, and the deal with this is that just, it is a little cumbersome to get these things, right? So it's not just you're making guesses and things like that. You're actually having to observe games and track that in order to be able to accumulate that data. And so what FBref was doing is they were taking the data that they were getting and they were putting it not only into tables where you could look at things, you could sort by certain stats to figure out who's leading in certain categories and things like that. But one of the things that I was doing in a lot of the articles was those charts were in what are called radar charts or spider charts, where you can align those into a circular graph so you can see offensively, possession, defensively, what players were doing based on those categories. And they were being compared with players in the same league, with players in comparable leagues, which, again, if you've seen articles that I do, those men's next 14 competitions bracket, that's MLS players compared to, Liga MX and Arrivederci and Copa Libertadores matches and things like that, right? So not the big five, not your Premier League or your La Liga, but that kind of next tier of league. So you can really get a sense of either compared to players within the league or players that are of a comparable competition, how those players are doing, how they stack up, how they measure up, what they're good at, what they're bad at, things like that, right? So you can get a more comprehensive view of what a player's like. And then you can also, with those comparisons, you could see, okay, if this player is being acquired and it's in place of this player, like a Jaden Nelson for an Osman Bukhari or a Facundo Torres for an Osman Bukhari, if you want to do that, you can see what you're getting comparatively, right? You can see what Bukhari's better at, you can see what Nelson or Torres are better at, and you can get a sense of this is how it might apply on the field. So big, long kind of explanation, but just want to set the stage for what happened. Earlier this week, FBref announced the provider of our advanced soccer data, and we believe this is Opta, we're not sure, but it's just based on what we know about the way that this data is sourced. They're kind of the big giant that provides this for a lot of people. They sent us a letter terminating our access to their data feeds and requiring the deletion of their data from the site immediately. So there were allegations of misuse and things like that, and we won't go into that necessarily, but essentially FBref had to, by just thinking about their liability and the threat that came from this data provider. Not only are they not putting new data up, but a lot of that old data that was there is gone. So the charts that I was able to make on FBref are not available. And one of the big things too is that there's not a lot of data. There's still some data that exists, and there's still some other accumulators and things like that for a lot of men's soccer. But for women's soccer, what was being housed on FBref was one of the main sources, and it's a lot harder to get that data now. So it's a big blow to people who do that kind of work like me. There are still sources, there are still places to get this, and we will still feature some of that as we're able to acquire it. There is still some publicly available data that's out there, and you can make charts and figure out things kind of based on that, but it's hampered in a big way. So it is definitely a blow, and it is something where it's going to be harder to be a nerd soccer fan essentially as a result of what's happened. And it is a little bit sad, but at the same time, I'm going to try to persevere, going to try to use the resources that are out there. One, which I'm going to hopefully showcase here on Sunday.
Nice.
So you can get a sense of what that looks like going forward. Knock on wood that these sources for data will still be around and that we'll still be able to do these sorts of things and that it won't be hampered further. There's the status quo now, and hopefully the status quo does not get worse, but it's kind of in a less happy place than it was even last week.
The other angle of this, and no offense, Phil, but who cares about Phil West and these stats nerds? When it comes to literally the development of the sport, where do you get your team stats analysts from? People who have access to these stats. And if they are not available at the grassroots level, if it is something that has a high barrier to entry, there's not some billionaire in Lakeway who's out there going, well, all right, I'll pay for the Opta data for my kid who wants to be a soccer statistician. It is something that
teams can afford it, but like individual journalists can't afford it.
Precisely. Journalists and just aspiring analysts. It's like, how do you go to school for soccer statistics? Well, you kind of don't already, so you extra can't without access to this stuff unless you're inside of a team organization. To me, it is the endemification of trying to build a better pipeline for soccer stat analysis. It's something that, to me, does hold the sport back in the United States. And this is me speaking off the cuff from not knowing the way that they do it in Europe. But at the same time, soccer in Europe has a radically deeper development pipeline for all jobs, for all parts of the sport than anything in the U.S. This is something that, and for legal reasons, I'm not going to say is what Opta is doing because we don't know that it's Opta for sure. But if it's Opta, whoever it is that's doing this, they are materially hurting the ability to grow their own addressable market in the United States, which is the dumbest shooting off your own foot to spite your face that they could be engaging in.
Well, it's a matter of, okay, if you think that your data commands a certain value and there's a certain price for it, and you're going to set that price where only like a certain tier of organizations can have access to that, then that's one thing. But this democratization has helped a lot of people. Like American Soccer Analysis, they're still able to get data, they're still able to do things in their own ways, and they're doing a lot of really good work, and a lot of that's coming up from that. And my plans have changed, unfortunately. I was going to be at American Soccer Insights conference next weekend, but some things have shifted and I'm not able to go to that, but went last year, and just to see the work that was being done by people that are close to that is really pretty incredible. And it will still continue, but it's just, again, especially on the women's sides of things, I just wish that big data providers like that would see this as good, and maybe even have like kind of tiers and things like that where you can still have access to those kind of basic statistics where you can do that kind of work and learn some more things about the game and educate fans. I do think that it's really helpful, and that's one of the things that I've really wanted to do with Verde All Day, is to bring more of that data in a way that is not only available thanks to the sort of democratization that we're seeing with some of these analysts doing work with ASA and with other places, but also to make it make sense, right? So to make people understand, here are these numbers, here's why you should care, here's what it's telling us, and then also here's what it's not telling us, right? So like I said at the end of my article yesterday, Torres was not staying awake at night wondering why his XA wasn't better when his teams were like having incredible top four finishes and doing really well. But at the same time, you get a sense of what kind of player he is, and maybe the advantages, but also the challenges that he will bring to Nico Estevez when he fully integrates into the team. That there will be, from the stats, you can understand, okay, this is what he does well, this is where he needs to be complimented.
I mean, if you don't have anything else, Phil, I can think of no better way for us to go out on this episode than the mental image that you just gave me of Facundo Torres laying up at night, gently touching his frosted tips, wistfully wondering, whither, my XA? Oh, my XA, will one day my XA get where I want it to be? Alas, alas, and alack.
And scene.
This is the best thing I've heard in the history of the 8 years I've been on this planet.